Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We're going to start tonight with some humor. Three trannies and a white male cishet shitlord go into a school bathroom and the world goes crazy. Well, sorry I couldn't resist that, folks. I had to do it. The voices in my head made me. But tonight we are talking about transgender issues and hopefully even a much more broad conversation with that. I am joined tonight by people with firsthand experience in this matter, by the one and only Theron Meyer. Hi, Theron.
Hey,
Okay.
Michael. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. See, that's the problem with muting myself. But yeah, hello everyone, and thanks for having me, Paul. I look forward
Sure.
to
Glad you unmuted yourself, or else David Futrell would write an article about my silencing you. Also with us tonight is Xander Kegg. Xander, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, thank you, Paul, for inviting me, and hello to everybody that's out there watching and listening.
Thank you. And we are also going to be joined by Blair White, who is late. Of course, you know how it is with women, never on time. And we're getting some of that from Blair tonight, but I'm sure she'll be in to join us, and I'm sure she's got a lot of very nice things and cool things to say about this topic. Well, here it is in the news, folks. We've got the Obama administration has essentially done the same thing with the public school system that his administration did with colleges and universities in the Dear Colleague letter, which is to say we're going to set a new standard, and if you don't obey and comply, we're going to pull your funding. This time it is to make all public schools bathrooms available for use by people according to the gender they identify with, not the gender they were necessarily born with. It's obviously been a very controversial push by the Obama administration. There has been some level of virulent reaction to it from politicians and from some members of the public. So we're going to start this conversation by discussing that issue. And Xander, why don't we start with you? I just want to get from both of you and from Blair when she arrives an idea of what your reaction was to the order and to the way that it was issued to schools.
Oh boy, I thought you were going to do ladies first.
No, we don't roll that way here.
No, you guys.
All right.
It's all about the men.
You know, I have to be honest with you, Paul. One thing, I live in California, and this has not been a big issue that I've been paying that much attention to. Well, I mean, like the thing in North Carolina, of course I know about it, but I haven't been paying much attention to it beyond social media and listening to NPR and other broadcasts. But the idea about the schools, I mean, it's interesting. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is who is going to pay for this, right? I mean, literally pay, not financial cost, but other kinds of costs. If the federal government takes money away from schools, the students are going to suffer. And I don't know how many people are talking about that issue, and that issue to me is profound. The other issue is, you know, I know that there's been some ideas about if the students can't use the male bathroom or the female bathroom on campus, then they'll be using, you know, like a nurse's office or some other, you know, single-sex bathroom, something like that. And some people are okay with going in those bathrooms, and some people are not okay with going in those bathrooms. So I think it's going to hit everybody very differently on a personal level, but on the big, you know, the structural level, I think students are going to be on the losing end of this.
Okay, and it sounded to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but with the first part of your answer, Xander, it almost sounded to me like that you had other issues on your mind that were more important than this one in terms of what's going on. I mean, could it be that transgender people actually have other issues that they're thinking about before this politicized one?
Well, I know I am. I mean, the last time we spoke, of course, I mentioned that I work with homeless veterans, and there are a lot of trans people within the veteran population, and many of them are homeless. Unemployment, underemployment, these are big issues in the community, and those are issues that are more central to my interests and things that I pay attention to.
Okay, mine as well, and well said, Xander. Theron, how about you? What was your reaction when you first saw this on the news?
I was kind of conflicted. Well, see, the thing is, I don't really support public education. I don't think the Department of Education should exist in the first place. So it's kind of like, you know, when you come at it from that angle, it's like what do you even think of this?
Well, let's pretend that I happen to agree with you. I would wipe out the Department of Education overnight if I could. But let's pretend that it's a sort of a unavoidable evil for the moment. What is your take on this as far as whether or not Xander's was that this could do, in a lot of ways, more harm than good?
I agree. I totally agree with Xander. I haven't looked into this specific story. I've looked into the North Carolina story a lot more and been following that a lot more. But I agree that this could, you know, be a really, like, it could cause a lot more trouble than what it's trying to solve. On the other hand, I personally know the importance of being able to access bathrooms safely. I have had, especially in the beginning of my transition, when I was not passing as well, I have experienced some bad things, like I was carried out by like 3 security guards.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So, no, and yeah, touched inappropriately, stuff like that. It happens. It does happen. So I understand the importance for trans people to be able to access bathrooms safely. But I'm so tired of Obama's authoritative, dictatorly attitude and how he goes about things that I just can't with him anymore.
Well, just wait till Hillary's president. Let me point out here, and because I think there's an area of this that has been covered somewhat in the news, but I think covered in the wrong way, and covered in a way that is laced with a lot of ignorance, but I still think it's a point that does deserve to be voiced, at least. You know, what you said is true. I know I saw a cartoon, and I found it totally believable, of somebody, an androgynous figure, standing in front of 2 bathroom doors, and there was a sign on each one, and one says, in this one I get yelled at, and the other side, in this one I get beat up. So
well, the one I get beat up in, and the other ones I have security called on me. Like,
yeah.
If you're in the wheelchair, that's exactly what women would do.
So that was a real world scenario for you, and that's a real part of it. But let me ask, and who better to ask than the 2 of you in this situation, what about the comfort of people that do feel uncomfortable with having transgender people coming into their restrooms? Is this, and I'm going to hold back on my opinion on it. I want to get yours first. But
I'll get mine quickly, just because I have an opinion on this. Laws should not be made based on how people feel, like how their comfort feels. Laws should be made based on whether or not it mitigates real harm or damage. If you pass laws based on how people feel, like where would we have gotten with the civil rights movement? Imagine all those racist white ladies being like, oh, we can't share these spaces with these dangerous black men.
Well, they did do that, actually.
Well, they did do that. That's not the standard. I don't care if you feel uncomfortable. Are we not mitigating real harm with, for example, the North Carolina law? And from my research, no, you're not. This is a useless bill.
Well, I think that's well said. Xander, your ideas?
Well, I just want to add that I also had a lot of really unfortunate experiences in bathrooms prior to my transition. going into women's bathrooms as a very masculine presenting female for over 20 years was no picnic, I'll tell you that. So the women's bathrooms for me were actually much more dangerous. I've never felt in any harm's way in any men's bathroom in the last 10 years, not even once. But I had many encounters in women's bathrooms with women that were scary, and in a couple of cases became violent. So I just want to put that out there, that, you know, the idea that women's bathrooms are violence-free zones unless there's a man in there is just not true. So the idea about safety, I get it. I get that people feel unsafe. I think a lot of it is based on this erroneous idea that they're unsafe because a man's in the bathroom. If a trans woman is in the bathroom, a woman is in the bathroom, not a man. And at the same time, why are men perceived as dangerous? And why is everybody paying attention to what's happening in the women's bathroom? What about all the dangerous people in the men's bathroom? So, you know, it's, what about trans men going into the men's bathroom? And what if we have to go in the women's bathroom? Like, there's other issues that don't really get talked about. But I get people's discomfort in my workplace with the federal government. If somebody is uncomfortable, then they have the option to use a bathroom where they would feel more comfortable, but they can't make that trans person leave the bathroom that they're already currently in.
And
I like that. I believe in that.
Sorry, Xander.
No.
And I mentioned to you yesterday when we were just doing a brainstorm session about how suddenly people are up in arms about these adult men, potential pedophiles, sharing washrooms with little girls. Suddenly they care about little girls, like they've been sharing washrooms with little boys unquestioned. And if you know the psychological profile of a pedophile, the gender of the child doesn't actually matter that much. It's about the fact that it's a child. But it just shows like the gynocentric threat narrative that's being pushed, just as always, you know.
You guys both actually robbed me of my segue into the next part of this, because you got right into the meat of it. That is what I am looking at as I read particularly, and yes, I'm going to call you out, conservative America in particular. A lot of people that lean to the right are suddenly, and even people that identify as anti-feminist and people that believe in small, unobtrusive government that stays out of our way and no regulation, suddenly want the government to come protect the decent white ladies. And I'm sorry, I don't have another way of putting it. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people losing their minds over the possibility that somebody who chose to transition to become female or to fulfill that identity is doing so that they can become a predator in women's restrooms, and at the same time, when it comes to the men and what's happening in those restrooms, absolutely no outrage whatsoever, no care, no concern, no nothing. It just stinks to me of a huge amount of gynocentrism and misandry. The actual hatred and suspicion of men. This is like, Xander, you were telling us recently about somebody who was, I won't get into details because I don't know how much you want revealed, about somebody that was just doing their job and was confronted as a potential pedophile. Yes. This is what men, trans men, and natural-born men, all men, gay men, straight men deal with this crazy mentality that we're threats all the time.
Creeps.
And we're really seeing this threat narrative come out in the middle of all this, politicization of the restroom issue in North Carolina and across the country. It's absolutely gone nuts. And I was going to ask you both if you'd noticed that, and obviously you both have, and have critiqued it quite well. So, speaking of that, and in the reaction of the community, I want to talk a little bit about what we started out before we went live tonight. We were talking about some of the reaction, even within the anti-feminist / MRM community, about this issue. And I pointed out, and I'm going to point it out again, because if I say it in private, I should say it in public. What I notice is that there's always, there's a lot of thoughtful commentary from people outside the trans community about this. I mean, I've read a lot of good stuff, and have talked to a lot of people that are very curious and keen to know more and to understand more. And I know that's certainly been a driving force in trying to set up these hangouts and talks with you guys. But there's always this minority there, and I'm glad it's a minority, that whenever you say trans man or trans woman, as though you're not already identifying that you're not talking about somebody born of that sex, they feel a compulsion that they have to rush into the comments and save everybody from their misunderstanding. Let everybody know this isn't a quote-unquote real man or real woman, that they're not biologically this. Here's what their chromosomes are. I got to admit a little bit of frustration about that, and I don't know if I should be, but I wonder. It bothers me when I see it in the comments on my website. I'm not going to moderate it out because I believe in letting most people's ignorance show for itself. But what is either one of you can start. What is your collective experience with this as an issue, that somebody feels like that you don't know who you are and they need to tell you?
Well, I get called a man in my comment section every single day. It's fine, whatever. I'm so used to it. That's just, it comes with the territory of making content online. I think people generally do not like people who blur the lines. In general, I think it's often a threat to a lot of people's sense of self as well. You know, you see this person who completely kind of broke through a bunch of identity barriers, transitioned from male to female, and I think that can scare people's sense of identity and make them feel threatened. And then that drives them to go into the comment section and be like, "This is a man, don't be fooled," blah blah blah. Maybe this is just a hypothesis.
Well, and that's probably as good as we're going to do right now, because I mean that's something that I think, depending on, it may vary from individual to individual what actually motivates them. Something that you said, and I have to admit from my own past, that I remember the first time. You're right. People that push the lines, particularly of gender or anything, I can tell you as somebody that has pushed the lines about male identity, that I've encountered buckets and buckets of hate and resistance for the last 7 years, just by challenging the role of men, or whether or not men should be allowed to define that for themselves instead of having it defined by women or feminists or ideologues. That's gotten trouble. But I do remember the first time that I saw David Bowie on an album cover. I had a negative reaction. I looked at that and said, no, not for me. I'll listen to it some other time. And of course, later on, as I sort of grew up and matured, I became a huge fan. I was even sickened when we recently lost him, and he was somebody that really pushed those lines in I think, a real courageous way. But I said all that to say that I understand that there may be something innate in all of us, or in most of us, that has a sort of emotional negative reaction to somebody pushing lines in that way. So I wanted to get that out there, and I didn't want to forget you either, Xander. Have you? I'm looking at you, and I just think another dude. So I don't know if you really encounter anything, but what has that experience been like for you? I mean, I'm sure during the earlier parts of your transition, it was rougher than it is now.
Well, I don't have as visible of an identity, or as visible as a presence. You know, I don't do YouTube videos. I'm not on different people's shows, so I don't have the same exposure that Blair and Theron have, and you. So that's kept me sort of sheltered from some of those comments. But the last time we did an interview, it was audio only, and there was one person that commented something about they didn't think that, what was it? Something like they didn't think anybody would think I was a man, but they hadn't seen me, so I posted a picture of myself, and I said, I think they would, you know? So because since the image of me wasn't in that interview, you know, it was easy for them to think that maybe I just looked like a very masculine woman with a deeper voice. But the idea that I'm not, quote, a biological man or born an assigned male, I don't dispute that. I have no reason to dispute that. I have no interest in disputing that. I don't feel why I would need to sort of bolster myself up and say, yes, I am. It's like, I just agree with people when they say, you're not a real man. I say, well, okay, I'm a trans man, and I'm living as a man. People see me as a man. I work in the world as a man. So it says male on all my IDs. So regardless of what their opinion is, you know, my life is the way it is. So I just disregard it and move on. But I mean, when things like this happen, I would imagine there will be comments. I mean, I can prove right now, like, this is real. This is a real beard. This is attached to my face. Like, it's not makeup.
You
right?
sure
Like,
it's not
this is what
Superman?
testosterone does. No,
Is
it's
there
not.
a
It's all
naked,
there.
Xander, is there a naked cat running around somewhere?
Absolutely. This is what testosterone does.
I get really frustrated when people seem to think that I'm trying to convince them that I'm a genetic female, that I'm a genetic woman. When I say that you're missing the point. Like, if I were a genetic woman, then I wouldn't be a trans woman. And it's frustrating. Like, I mean, whether or not I'm biological, because see, I'm taking hormones, and that's part of what is a biological woman, is the hormones level. So I'm like, so I guess you can call me biologically intersexed at this point, but that's like still missing the point. Like, that's not what we're talking about here.
Okay.
You know what, Paul? One of the things I don't think none of us mentioned that I think might be a key piece in why people feel uncomfortable is attractions, right? So if a non-trans man, or even a trans man, I guess, is finding a woman attractive and then learns that the woman is a trans woman, that might cause them some uncomfortableness about their sexual orientation. And especially for like a cis man or non-trans man who's heterosexual, all of a sudden he might start thinking, am I gay? I'm not gay. I don't want to be gay. And he might have this very strange visceral reaction that just comes. You know, he'd have to actually sit down and think about it and process it. It just comes, I think, sometimes. And a thinking person would question that, but some people don't question it. They just react.
Yeah, I can pick up
It
on
happens.
that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. Go ahead, Darren.
Well, it happens to trans men too, with gay men, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, gay men. Let's not even start with gay men. No, picking up from what you said about, yeah, it's kind of going back to when I said that trans women kind of blur the lines and they kind of threaten identity. So it can often threaten a straight man's identity and sense of self. I'm a straight man, but I find this trans woman attractive. And like every guy that I've been in a relationship with, to some extent, had to go through some kind of an mini identity crisis first. Then they get over it, and then it's fine. But it's for most guys like a process. Like, yeah.
So, do you consider that, Darren, to be just sort of part of the cost of your relationships, that they're going to come with some kind of crisis in them about identity?
I don't mind if they have a crisis of identity, as long as it doesn't stay, as long as they get over it. I guess I've sort of come to accept that my relationship with men will not be typical in every way, and then there will be kind of little things like that, little issues, maybe if it's an identity crisis or maybe he just doesn't know how to handle my body or whatever. There's always something a little bit different, and I've accepted that there will always kind of be little things that is different that I would have to deal with.
And if I'm getting too personal, let me know. We'll just move on to another subject. But is this also in any way maybe the source that has driven some of your relationships apart?
I haven't had that many relationships.
Okay. Okay. Well, I wasn't implying that anything like that, but I assume that maybe some people that you've been with were not able to manage that identity crisis as well as others.
I guess calling them relationships is a little bit too strong. Let me say, guys I've dated.
Okay.
Because I was in a relationship for 2.5 years with a trans man. Well, the fact that he's trans isn't really relevant, but now you know that I was in a 2.5 year relationship with a trans man. And when we got into the relationship, I still identified as male, and I lived my life as a male. And then, like, near the end of our relationship, I transitioned. He was okay with it. But my point is, I haven't been single and female for that long. Actually.
Okay.
But as I'm saying, like, almost every guy that I've dated for some period of time, I haven't found anyone long term. Wow, I'm really getting personal here. I haven't found anyone long term, but it's very common for guys to have like a mini identity crisis. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it is. I'm asking really personal stuff. Ultimately, all these things become personal issues. I'm just hoping that somewhere in the exchange that people who are curious or riding the fence on these or thinking about these issues may come to understand that we all have shared difficulties as human beings in relationships, and ultimately we're all not that much different. At least that's my experience. Xander, what was it you were saying just a few moments ago? There was something I wanted to comment on. Oh yes, that I had also related very much to people telling me I wasn't a real man. I get that all the time, and I'm grateful to not be a real man by what the standards are for real men, of course in scare quotes, in this culture. I would rather not be one. But if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you, I can't imagine for either of you in these situations, one, the complexity of what your life stories are, of what it's like to go through this kind of process. Do you mind if I ask you, Xander, what sort of impact this has had on your relationship life, how that works for you?
Well, my wife and I have been married almost 14 years now. And when we met, I was before I transitioned, so we were what would be perceived as from the outside as a lesbian relationship, although neither of us identified as lesbians. And then 3 years later, then I transitioned, and so it hasn't had that much of an impact socially. Since I've transitioned medically with hormones and surgeries, it's had an impact on some of the way we relate to each other. But I think that any marriage goes through different kinds of transitions throughout the course of a lifetime. So I don't think that it's anything extraordinary. It may be out of the ordinary because I'm trans, but I don't think it's anything that's insurmountable so far. But the thing about identity that comes up for trans men in a lot of cases who are in relationship with women prior to transition, or even in the beginning of transition, the person they might be partnered with is lesbian identified, and so there's a similar kind of crisis of identity that happens, like, oh my gosh, now I'm in this relationship with this person who identifies as male, but they're not yet, maybe out in the world or being seen as a man. So, I mean, I think there's some similar crossover in our community to what Darren was talking about.
Well, I understand certainly that, we have a lot in common. I'm 14 years into my long-term relationship too, and I can tell you that all other things being equal, it's not a rose garden for anybody in long-term relationships. There's always struggles. There's always complications, but some of the good ones do last.
Well, and we're men of a certain age too, right, Paul? I mean,
yeah,
we're going to have all kinds of medical things that are happening to us as we age.
they already are.
Marriages have to absorb those things, right?
Yep, you do. I have first-hand experience. Past 2 years, I've been to the doctor more times than I ever had probably in my whole life before, just dealing with stuff. And that's what happens when you age. You do that, and it gets more frequent until one day you don't have to go anymore. But hopefully we prevent that as much as possible and try to keep going strong. There is. Also, I think, and this is one of the things that's really of critical importance to me as a men's advocate, is that in this conversation we have a trans woman, we have a trans man, we have a, what do you want to call it, just a dude.
Shitlord.
What's that? Oh, shitlord, yes, that's right. Here I am with proof of it with my white skin and my Anglo background and all. On top of that, I'm from Texas, too. I mean, you can't get any more evil than me or any more powerful. Only I just
like one of my favorite people on the internet.
What's that?
I said, you're like one of my favorite people on the internet.
I'll carry that one for the rest of my life. Thank you. That will be a big plus in my backpack to carry around. But we find in our discussions, we've had limited discussions with Theron and a good bit more discussion with Xander, and the more that I talk with trans people, the more, and I don't know too much about and I'm putting scare quotes around this, communities, because I think part of that is fallacy, because I know that in the discussions I've had with Xander that there is factions and there is subculture within communities and divisions, and I know that, for instance, that Xander, didn't you say that one of the most common questions that you've gotten speaking at conferences was, how does it feel to have white male privilege?
Yes, all the time.
So
yes.
How does it feel to have white male privilege? Because I don't know either.
I've decided when people ask me that question, my answer is going to be, it's great. That's my answer.
Yes, you can twirl that mustache that you're growing and snicker.
And then I say, well, I'm first generation Mexican American, so let's not forget that. See, people make all kinds of assumptions just based on how people look.
Yep. And some of those assumptions are very destructive. I mean, I think the assumption of power on the part of people based on appearance is very destructive for them because it makes their pain, it makes their difficulties invisible. Look, you work with homeless vets. You know what the invisibility of people's problems can ultimately do to them, because I mean they become almost like objects on the side of the road that people drive past on the way to work and wish they would go away so that they didn't clutter up the look of the neighborhood. It's a tragedy. But what I found in our discussions is a lot more common ground. But what about the communities? One of the concerns that I have, I mean, I was glad to see this issue raised around the bathrooms. I was glad to see it make the news. I think these things need to spark a lot of discussion in a lot of places. But one of the things I am concerned about, even in the men's movement, is ideology and victim identity politics. That sort of thing, I don't see that has ever having really helped anybody. And I wonder if you think if both of you think among transgender people, is the allure of victim politics a strong one, and is it something that's growing faster than discussions like we're having here and now?
Yeah, I was talking to someone on Facebook about this the other day, and I agree. I think that that the trans movement today and the politics around transgenderism and trans people is more divisive, and it's actually it's distantiating trans people from the rest of the world even more. And but someone said in a comment section, you know, this politics is the reason why most people have such a hard time like accepting and having respect for trans people. But see, I think that's not even the fault of that. You can't put the fault on trans people for that, or even really trans politics, because you shouldn't. Your respect for one trans person should not be conditional on how savory or how much you like the politics of another trans person. I mean, that's not how respect works. No matter how unsavory and how horrible the politics is, it really shouldn't dictate whether people respect us and are just generally decent and compassionate towards us. So regardless of how horrible the politics is, I think if that's how it's going, if that's true, if society is refusing to respect and accept and have compassion for trans people based on trans politics, I think the problem lies with society.
Fair enough. Xander?
I think I've forgotten the question. I was so enthralled in what Theron was saying.
Well, the question, I'll remind you, the question is, there is, in all movements, there's a tendency toward collective identity. We see this. This is why we have a men's movement. It's why we have feminism. It's why we had gay rights. It's why we had a civil rights movement that was predominantly African American. And there is organizations and has been movements for migrant farm workers that were predominantly Mexican American. These are identified groups that seek some sort of justice and seek acceptance and fair treatment in a society that historically, in many ways, has not treated them fairly. My one sort of exception to this is that I don't buy much of any of the line of feminists about the treatment generally of women in culture, but even some of that I can accept. So there's a tendency for people to bond together and identify either under their skin color or their gender or something, and to see an us versus them mentality with regard to them and the rest of society. And that sometimes I've noted, I think, for instance, it is that sort of mentality, I believe, in some minority communities, like the black community, has made some advances, and it's also done some great harm. And I wonder if your experience is to see any of that inclination in the trans community, whatever you want to call that, and whether or not you see that as potentially causing problems for them, or if you agree with Theron, that many of the problems originate from a society that's simply intolerant of people pushing those boundaries like we talked about earlier.
Well, I think any of those things I agree with. So I do believe that there are pros and cons to uniting, so as a community. So for instance, I think that regardless of what kind of trans person one is, there are common and shared interests around wanting to be not brutalized by police officers, not wanting to be subjected to harassment by medical providers, not wanting to be perceived of as a threat in public, right? So there are things that we share in common, and so we make laws which are supposed to try and protect people, but then we go maybe one step further and make a whole class of people extra special in the eyes of the law, which sometimes then can kind of flip things over on the other side. It's as if we go a little too far sometimes. So for instance, and I know this is going to get me in a lot of trouble with people that I know in particular who are watching this. So for instance, having gender dysphoria in the DSM, which is the diagnostic statistics man used for diagnosing people so that you can get access to health care, like hormones and surgeries. I think one of the arguments I've heard used for why it's important and an imperative really that stays as a diagnosis in that book is because trans people, say, in prison, otherwise wouldn't get their benefits, their medical care benefits. And there's a part of me that wants to say, well, so what? They're in prison. I mean, why should we make a whole ruling for a whole community of people based on a very, very, very small population of people, which would be trans people in prison or jail? So I mean, that's controversial to say, but it does pop into my mind from time to time. But as far as the divisions, the fractures, I mean, if we just stayed attentive to what we do share, and that's the right to be treated with dignity, respect, free of harassment and violence, and the ability to come and go as we please in public. Everything else, we can find other groups of people that we have more in common with and share interests with. I think Blair was saying something when we were brainstorming yesterday about the whole brotherhood, sisterhood notion that, you have to be the right kind of trans person to be part of the brotherhood or the sisterhood. But what if I have nothing else in common with most trans men I come in contact with? Am I supposed to shove myself into their notion of what I am to be, or can I go off and hang out with people that I have more in common with, and maybe I'm the only trans man in that group, but that should be okay too, right? So I think sometimes we should come together, and probably most of the time we're going to be doing our own thing, and I think that should be okay.
Again, that's very well said. I happen to agree with you. I mean, it's just a personal opinion, but I think that there's a problem. It used to be that homosexuality was classified as a mental illness. And the fact of the matter is that throughout human experience, for as far as we know, there have been homosexuals in the population. So what it tells me is that this is not an aberration. This is the normal part of the human condition, is that a certain percentage of the population will be homosexual. And for whatever we call gender dysphoria, I am betting I'm in the company of people that know this history a lot better than I do, that as we look back through history, we will find the incidents of people in this state, I don't even want to call it a condition, throughout history, inferring that it is a normal part of human beings to have this going on. And I think, it's not that I'm insensitive to people in prison, but I think the way that we do that is that we don't build a prison industrial complex and incarcerate everybody at rates that exceed the rest of the world, particularly men, and that we keep nonviolent people out of prisons. And violent people in prisons, I don't care if they get their hormones or not. That doesn't make any difference to me. But as long as we have this as a mental disease, which is what the DSM says it is, isn't that a problem? I'm wondering, Theron, what your thoughts are on that.
I don't have any particular strong opinions on whether or not it should be included in the DSM. Thing is, transgenderism isn't in the DSM anymore. It's called gender dysphoria.
Well, yeah, that's what we said was...
yeah, but it's not. There's a difference. See, transgenderism simply describes having a gender identity that is different from what we were assigned at birth. Gender dysphoria describes the set of symptoms that many trans people, but not all, experience.
Okay, but
and that's an important distinction. So I don't really care if gender dysphoria is there or not.
You don't think that may contribute to some stigmatizing transgender people?
I don't think it will make much difference to remove it. People will still be saying it's a mental illness.
Well, there's that.
I wanted to say, I wanted to touch on the idea of community. I have kind of been given guidance to trans people, mostly online, and these are trans people who feel extremely isolated. They often live in small towns. They don't have anyone. Their parents, some of them don't know, some of them do and completely reject them. For these people, a sense of community can be really important, especially along the lines of being trans. And I think it's amazing for these people to be able to choose their own families. I wish every trans person had that privilege to be able to choose their own families and move to a big city where there are a bunch of trans people, a bunch of queer people. As long as that sense of community and as long as that community is voluntary. See, I get lumped in with this community that I don't identify with at all the time. And then I'm held responsible for what I say. How could you say that? You're blah, 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 part of the trans community. And as someone, as a member of the trans community, I didn't sign up. Where's the membership? Yeah. So it's about, is this community, was it formed voluntarily or not? I think the trans community mostly denotes a group of people that didn't sign up for anything. They didn't even sign up for being trans.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think it's a misnomer. I think that there are trans communities, and that there are times and places. Like, I really like going to conferences where the majority of people in attendance are trans, and we share information with each other and form connections, maybe find mentors, provide mentorship. I like that, but I wouldn't want to be forced to only do that. And if I chose not to do that, I wouldn't want somebody to think I'm less of, a trans person or not a good trans person. I think we get into some of those things in our community.
I also wouldn't want to be held responsible for the actions of some community that I didn't choose to be a part
Sure.
of. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's my thoughts on that.
I believe you. And I don't blame either of you for your position on that. I mean, that's something the old guilt by association route plagues us all at one time or another. We've got a lot of issues that we could be talking about, but I have sort of dictated the pace of this conversation. Is there anything that if you want to switch chairs with me for either of you, that if you were running a show that you would say, because I'm talking here, I'm trying to sort of lead a conversation about a subject that I am still very ignorant about in the long run, and I'm trying to get educated on it. But so if I've not filled in some gaps here with questions and with points that I'm making, critique me. What would you say? And what would you ask?
I have one point that I'd like to also have Xander's thoughts on and his experiences. So I before transitioning, I heard a lot that hormone, HRT specifically, can have an effect on your sexuality. It can kind of blur the lines between whether you like men or women, depending on what you liked before you started transitioning. And I've actually realized, I've recently been noticing that. So there's a little bit of personal information as well. I've realized recently that I'm bisexual. I was never bisexual, and suddenly I'm bisexual. I used to be, I just like men. Now I like men and women. Did you experience anything like that, Xander? That was my question.
Interestingly enough, I think I have heard a lot of people in the trans community, especially in trans male community, talk about this issue of once the hormones start. And I have a theory. My theory is that for many of us, before we started our transition, whether we were in a lesbian relationship or we were in a straight relationship, if we had any attractions to, quote, the other sex or another sex, we might not be comfortable talking about it, because I know, for instance, I was part of the lesbian community. Any woman in the lesbian community that I was part of, if she started talking about being bisexual or having attractions towards men, she'd almost, surely be, excommunicated from that circle of friends. So there was a threat to your social circle if you discuss these kinds of things. But I think that one of the things that I've heard a lot of people talk about is prior to transition, even if they were attracted to men but only partnered with women, the reason they wouldn't partner with men is because they didn't want to be treated like a woman by a man. So once they transition, they are comfortable being sexual with men because now it's a man relating to a man. For myself, I would never have labeled myself bisexual, but I was always attracted to males and females, but only partnered with females because I spent most of my adolescence in a girl-only school, and I didn't learn how to relate to boys. I mean, that's just plain and simple. I just didn't learn how to relate to them, and I thought being with girls was easy. I'll just stick with that, and I just became basically a lesbian. It was purely by my own choice. I don't feel like it was some biological, setting in my system. So it didn't really change for me as far as my attractions at all. But I do know that it is fairly common to hear people talking about this.
Yeah. The way it changed for me was I've always been attracted to girls, but I never could imagine myself partnering with a woman. And now I very easily can see myself partnering with a woman. And I think you might be onto something there when it comes to how you relate before transitioning, because maybe I couldn't really explore that part of myself or come to admit that, because if I were to be with a woman, I would have to be the man in the relationship, and that was just that idea. Yeah, and that's probably, you might be onto something there.
Well, and there's a difference between being a woman partnering with a woman and a man partnering with a woman. That's just, we relate to each other very differently. And you'll see people will relate to you very differently too from outside your relationship. It's been quite amazing actually to see the difference in the way my wife and I are treated by others. And we're still the same people, but people relate to us very differently. And so I think sometimes the way people see us, the way people treat us, it has an impact on how we feel about ourselves, how we see ourselves, and then how we conduct ourselves. I think, there's this interconnection between us all. But I'm glad that you're paying attention to those things, and I hope you have some really good experiences, with all that. I like women are great.
Well, as much as I get accused of hating them, I don't. I think they're great too.
Worth bringing up, Paul? I hope that was worth bringing up.
It was worth bringing up. I have a sort of final thing that I want to ask, and this is, before I ask it, I want to qualify the question a little bit. This is not meant to, I'm not asking about each of you personally when I bring this up. This is a generic investigation. I read a lot of conflicting information about sexual reassignment surgery, and some people feeling like it harmed them, others saying that that's not true, that it's propaganda. Can you maybe fill us in with any enlightenment, either of you or both of you, about that particular topic?
Maybe Xander should go first. I do have some things to say, but.
So, Paul, just to clarify, you're saying you've heard people talking about that going through the surgery itself can be harmful to the person, like psychically? Or?
Yes, well, that people have regretted it, have done it, and end up regretting it and wish they hadn't done it.
That's not true, though. That's not true. Rates for surgery regret amongst trans people is actually lower than the rest of the population who have received cosmetic surgery. They base this on some studies that show that rates of suicide increase after medical transition or surgical transition. Well, you can't say, you can't conclude after that they regretted it. They might feel, here's the thing, here's my theory around that, if that's true. I don't really know if it's true. I should have to look into it more, but let's just accept that that trans people, the rates of suicide increase for, or at least attempted suicide increase after surgical transition, after sex reassignment surgery. This could be for multiple reasons. I theorize that it's because they're still not happy, they're still not accepted or they still don't pass. I mean, because if you look like a man and you get a vagina, then you're just a man with a vagina. You still don't pass, right? And a lot of trans people, they don't look like, a lot of, especially trans women, they don't look like me. They don't pass as well. They look rough. I think a lot of trans people feel at a loss because they thought that it's not that they regret getting the surgery, but they thought the surgery would solve a lot of issues. And now they think to themselves, do I go back living as a man and deny my authenticity and who I really am? Or do I live as a freak who's rejected by society, who's seen as not themselves as a man whilst trying to pass so hard? You know, I'm at a loss of options. And I think a lot of men also commit suicide because they don't feel they have anywhere to go either, and they feel like they're at a loss of options as well. And I can imagine that that's why a lot of trans people kill themselves after surgery, because they realize I don't have any more options left. It's still a shitty situation for me.
Rough stuff. Xander?
Well, oh gosh, there's so much to say about this. So right off the bat, I just want to mention that when people talk about SRS or sex reassignment surgery, they're almost probably 90 or 95% of the time, they're not referring to trans men at all. So they're talking of trans women who have sex reassignment surgery. So, and this idea that there's just one surgery, right? It's like you go in the door with one body, you come out the door with another body. And so, I mean, it may be the case, but it usually isn't. And for trans men, it's definitely not the case. We have several different surgeries, and everybody elects a different one. Around regret, I mean, yes, there are people who regret starting transition. I have not met one trans man yet who regretted having chest reconstruction surgery. And I know several men who, more than several, hundreds of men, trans men who have had genital reconstruction surgery, who have had pretty significant complications even, and still don't regret having the surgery. So I don't know, for people who are regretting it, I don't know what's leading them to the regret. I think Theron's onto something about isolation, a lack of support, a lack of community. I think that these are primary issues. I think there's also a lot of silence around these ideas. I don't know how it is in trans women community, because our communities are very different actually. But in trans male community, it's not likely that people are going to find a warm reception at an all-trans male event or meeting where bringing up the subject of, say, genital reconstruction is going to be met favorably. It's a very controversial thing to bring up within the circle, within the community, and there's a lot of dissension within the community about this, these surgeries. So if you can't even talk about it in your community, then where are you going to get the information you need? Where are you going to get the support you need? Where are you going to get the guidance that you need? Because these are things that people need. Surgery, any surgery, is a significant endeavor. We need the support and guidance. We need to be informed about things. And since there's so little talk about it, people are having these surgeries with so little information about what their life is going to be like post the surgery. I don't mean after they are all healed up. I mean literally right after the surgery. They have no idea how much pain they're going to be in, how much regret they might have. I had that. I woke up from my genital reconstruction surgery, and one of the first things I thought was, oh my God, what did I just do? I think that's a common thing when you make such a huge shift in your life, to go, what have I done? Because there's so many unknowns ahead. But I don't think that now, you know, but I did think that then. And just me admitting that is something that you're rarely going to hear. We don't, even in our community, talk like this with each other. And I think it's important that we do talk about things like this, about, you know, what do we mean by regret? Yeah. And is that even wrong? Is it bad? right?
Well,
So what
no,
if somebody has regret? So what?
absolutely. Regret may be the part of many different processes. It may be just another
Hmm.
developmental aspect of getting to where you're going. I would think, and I'm guessing, Xander, that you would agree that at least in the trans male experience, that the great difficulty is the same difficulty that all of us cishet shitlords have, in that navigating the masculine landscape is not as easy as people think it is. It's a
Yeah.
complex business, this thing, manhood. And I can imagine that a lot of people get there thinking that with the appearance comes the knowledge or the experience or the ability to interrelate with other men, and that would seem to be a learned skill that was going to take a lot more time, and it's something you can't get with surgeries or with hormones or anything else. It's just you're sort of thrown out there, I would imagine, into sink or swim. And
Absolutely. I mean, of course, it depends on your starting point, but I mentioned this to you previously that I came from the more separatist lesbian community, so I avoided men at all costs for as much as I could in life up to a certain point, and then all of a sudden I'm thrust into this world, and in my 40s, right? So the expectation is not only am I a man, but I'm a 40-something-year-old man, and I better know what's going on. And it's been about 10 years now since I transitioned. I'm almost 50 now, and I still have so much to learn. But what I've discovered is that it's not just trans men who have so much to learn about being a man and what's expected of men. This is just, I mean, thankfully I'm a social worker and I work almost entirely with men, and so I hear men all the time talking about how inadequate they feel, how they don't measure up, how they're insecure about things, and I'm like, oh, it's not just us. Like, this is a shared experience. And when I hear trans men talk about, I've always felt like a man, I don't know what they mean. I don't know what it means to feel. I know that the way I felt was conflicting with how I looked and how people saw me, but I don't know if that meant I was thinking and feeling like a man. I mean, so these are some things that that I'm still trying to put together. What does it mean to be a man, and what's expected of me? And I think a lot of it is just based on erroneous ideas about men in the first place.
well, there's certainly a lot of that. I don't know that anybody knows what it is to be a man, and I think one of the blessings, and I hope that at some point that the men's community, this end of it, the stuff that I do, grows enough that there's some outreach done, because I think there's a healing message in the idea that most of what this society teaches as expectations of men is junk anyway. And that pursuing that standard. I mean, this is how, when economic times go bad, the suicide rate in men skyrockets, and in women not so much. And a lot of that is tied to that feeling, well, I can't protect and provide. I'm not good for anything. I might as well not be here. There's a lot of those lessons that I would prefer to see men have a way out of not having to learn to begin with. But that in itself is another topic. Well, I think we've gone pretty good length of time here. I want to give you both, if there's anything else that either of you would like to add before we wrap this up and go. I just want to thank you both for coming. I want to mention also, too, Blair did not make it, but we also know Blair has a lot going on. I'm not going to go into details of her life, no crisis, but she's in a very busy moment. So I understand totally why she might not have been able to show tonight. But with that, Theron and Xander, is there anything either one of you would like to add to this discussion, with my thanks to both of you for having it?
I'd just like to say thank you, and it was so much fun, as always, Paul. And if anyone would like, I have a YouTube channel. You can go check it out. Subscribe if you like.
So where is that YouTube channel?
It's youtube.com/Theronmeyer, THERYNMEYER.
And thank you very much. Xander, you got any parting thoughts?
Well, I concur with Theron. I think this has been a whole lot of fun. I also just wanted to mention that, you know, we're three individuals, right? That's an obvious statement. But what I mean by that is the three of us, we share some things in common, and there are other things we don't share in common, politically, socially, economically, right? Like these issues that we're talking about cross these divides, these divisions, right? That there are ways that we're uniting, and I'm really happy to see that happening. And I mean, if for people out there, if you want to know more about what the life of a trans man is like, I'll plug away at my book Manning Up, which is available at xanderkeg.net, because these are 27 different trans men talking about what it's like for them now as men in the world. And we're all very, very different. So my experience is very different from theirs. And so it's good for people to get a well-rounded exposure to the lives of trans men, trans women, and our non-gendered kin in our community as well. So,
great, folks. Remember, that's Xander Keg, K-E-I-G, .net.
yes.
And he has a book. You want to know a lot more about the trans male experience. He's got 27 stories that he's compiled and edited, and you can certainly get some information there. I want to plug away at one thing, too. In just 7 weeks now, the International Conference on Men's Issues is happening in London. I wish you could, too. I wish you both could be there. I'm going to be speaking there. We're going to have other people like Karen Strawn is going to be speaking there. Aaron Pitsey will be there. I mean, it is a smorgasbord of some really great thinkers and really great people, minus these two, which we would like to have you there, but it doesn't always work out for international travel on a dime for everyone, but we have other secret plans. I'm going to be making an announcement about something else at the conference, so you guys stay tuned in that. We'll get you into one of these events before it's over. Possibly, hopefully, honestly, to have you speaking. One of the things I want people to know, and I've never pretended that I can speak for the men's movement. I've never contended to anyone that I was the leader. I'm just one voice out here, but I do want people to know that a voice for men is a voice for human rights, and that we don't care about anything except your desire to secure human rights for everyone. We don't care what your background is. We don't care about gender. We don't care about sexual orientation, color, religion. None of that matters. It never has mattered there, and I'm very proud of that about our organization. And it's why we want to have conversations like these, so we can all learn about each other and hopefully clean a little bit of this world up. With that, I will thank you both again, and everybody, we'll see you over in An Ear for Men, where my new video will be coming out Monday at 12:01 a.m. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.